Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. The main event is Dr. Russell Wigginton, the incoming president of the National Civil Rights Museum, on the future of the institution and critical race theory. Top of the podcast, no more pipeline. The Byhalia Connection crude oil pipeline called off by Plains All-American Pipeline. That's the company that spawned vocal opposition and a new local environmental alliance last year with its plans for a 49-mile link between Valero Refinery and an existing pipeline in Byhalia with a route through southwest Memphis. Plains sending a spokesman to the city council just this past week to advise the council to cease and desist on passage of two ordinances, one creating an infrastructure review board and permitting process for such pipelines within the city, the other establishing a 1,500-foot setback countywide for pipelines from schools, churches, parks, and family recreation centers. Brad Leone, the spokesman, saying the measures are anti-industry and will be challenged in court and will lose. The council and commission moving ahead with final votes on the measures this month. Councilmember Jeff Warren pulling his earlier version of the permitting process for a board that issues advisory opinions to the council, which would be the final stop for pipelines. But part of the permitting process is certification from Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Division that any such pipeline is 1,000 feet away from any water well field. That ordinance starts the process of three separate votes all over, with the first vote at the July 20th council session. Council members did not respond to the statement Leone read in their committee sessions this past week. A bit about our relaying of social media posts from our city's representatives in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate on Twitter, specifically on my account, at BDriesDM, which is also where we provide live coverage of the City Council and County Commission as well. We've been doing this long enough now that you have probably noticed a pattern that has evolved. If you haven't, it's probably time to lay out why I post what I do there, from Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty and Congressmen Steve Cohen and David Kustoff. First and foremost, the retweets are not an agreement with anyone's position or a disagreement. They're a way of keeping tabs on who is where on different issues. I'm looking for the best statements possible from them on where they stand and why they stand that way, and I really like it when these pop up at about the same time, like just before a key vote, which we've also been following more closely with stories that will include links to their social media. I prefer floor speeches or office videos. The idea is to contrast and compare where these four people who represent Memphis and Washington are on the issues. And the more we can hold up those positions next to each other, the more I think we're able to keep up with what's going on in the nation's capital as it takes place. There isn't much, if any, straying across party lines among these four particular elected officials. The nuance is in what they emphasize more than how they vote, although we want to track how they vote just as we track the key votes of the City Council and County Commission. So that's the philosophy and how things have evolved so far. Joining us now is Dr. Russell Wigginton, last week named as the new president of the National Civil Rights Museum. His tenure there will start next Monday. So the museum is 30 years old this year, and we are about 4 years past the expansion and renovation of the museum. What do you walk through the door with as a priority?
Thank you, Bill. And I appreciate you referencing the tremendous renovation work that has happened in recent years. I have a priority of building on the outstanding foundation that Beverly Robertson and Terry Freeman have provided over that time. When you think about what the museum needed in its early years and in its formative years, Beverly's ability to inspire, to market, and to connect with people was essential. Following her tenure, we've got a well-established, I would describe her as a leader in Terry Freeman, who I would describe as a masterful community builder and operations expert. Her experience, I think, in DC at the Community Foundation brought a sense of connectedness and efficiency to the museum. And I'm fortunate to follow them and have the ability to really highlight the educational aspects that the museum provides through some creative and multifaceted ways. I'm also able to build on the very sound philanthropic base that has been established and incorporate some national opportunities with foundations and corporations that extend beyond Memphis. I certainly will continue to work closely with local philanthropy. But in this day and time, and with the power and reputation of the museum, I'm especially excited about opportunities to share the word and share the opportunity for national philanthropy to participate in our efforts at the museum.
Right. You come to the post from SCORE, the State Collaborative on Reforming Education, where you were Chief Post-Secondary Education Impact Officer. Before that, you were a history professor and administrator at Rhodes College, and you've also been on the museum's board. So what drew you deeper into this institution, so to speak?
Sure. The culmination of those experiences is fair to say. I have enjoyed a 25-year relationship with the museum. One of my proudest professional moments was early in my tenure at Rhodes as a history professor, developing a civil rights history course and thinking about how to make civil rights come to life for students at that time. And I didn't have to go but 5 miles down the road to present this vivid image that intersected so nicely with what students were reading about in the National Civil Rights Museum. And it was at that time that I developed a relationship with Beverly. And soon thereafter, we had a formal established internship with Rhodes. And so that was really the foundation for me. I have immersed myself in the Memphis community over that 25 years, albeit not a native. I call myself a Memphian. And when the opportunity to serve on the board presented itself, I jumped at it quickly, and I've been honored to do so since 2010.
Mm-hmm. It turns out that history and education can be a particularly volatile mix, and that's certainly the case these days in our state. Let's talk a bit, if you will, about the state's ban on teaching what is being called critical race theory. First of all, is everybody discussing this, talking about the same thing when they drop that three-word phrase, do you think?
I'm certain that they are not. The fact of the matter is, as someone who has spent a long time in the education space, I don't even consider myself to be anywhere near an expert in critical race theory. However, it has become a catch-all for how we talk about our history, particularly as it relates to race and race relations in our country. When I think about that particular topic or that particular catch-all category right now, it actually makes me think that the National Civil Rights Museum has an opportunity to be one of the thought leaders in how we get past this particular moment and have conversations and dialogue and curriculum and pedagogy around how do we, in fact, tackle our history as a country, warts and all. And that takes a nuance, it takes a commitment and a particular passion, and it also takes patience. And so when I talk about education, I'm talking about how do we model as a museum what we hope people are able to do when dealing with difficult and challenging and sometimes painful historical remnants that still remain in our society. And I think the museum has a unique opportunity to be appropriately a part of that conversation and model the goodness that can come from having civil dialogue and discourse and actually having materials and curriculum to point to help guide people through that space, regardless of their starting point.
Mm-hmm. And Penny Schwinn, who is the Tennessee Commissioner of Education, is actually developing the state's guidelines that are past whatever is in the state law for something that teachers and educators can actually go by in this. Has the museum been consulted on that at this early stage in that?
I am not aware that the museum has been consulted related to Commissioner Schwinn's efforts. However, in my role at SCORE, I have had the opportunity to interact frequently with the commissioner. So I'd like to think that our established relationship, if you will come in handy when I assume the role at the museum, and that I would expect to be in conversation and hopefully partnership with the commissioner as well as higher ed leaders across our state in relationship to how the museum can be a asset and benefit their collective efforts.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the things some of the issues on this that people are struggling with on really all sides of the issue is the connection of our history, our entire history, as much of it as we can take in, to the present. And I think from the outset of the Civil Rights Museum, the museum has always been very clear that the past is not just over in the corner by itself and unconnected to what happens in the present. I
would second that perspective. My days as a practicing historian, if you will, were really grounded in that fundamental point you just made, Bill. Mm-hmm. I think I happen to be somebody who appreciates history for history's sake. But as a teacher, it was always about how does this connect to your present day and our present day life? And it's not that it's not a linear, necessarily a linear relationship, but there are trends and patterns and lessons to be learned from that past that we can apply. I think the key is entering that conversation with some degree or seeking some degree of neutrality and with an open mind. It's a very different kind of conversation if you've predetermined where you land on these really complex issues. That's where the tension seems to override what the possibilities are.
Right. Right, because going into discussions of these events, you really can't say, okay, at the outset we're not going to go here and we're not going to go there, and hope to have a full understanding of it. And I would imagine, because the museum is a regular stop for school groups, public, private, charter, post-secondary, that the museum encounters students who look at a situation and automatically go places where, by my reading of this state law, the teachers are not supposed to go. I mean, how do you stop the inevitable?
So I do think the interpretation of the law is still very much in discussion. It is broad enough that I think there's not a clear interpretation at this point. I do think that what the museum prides itself on is presenting facts and documented history of our country. And I think how educators use that in their interpretation and how they weave that into their classrooms is really where the aha moments, if you will, can happen. Because if you just go through the museum as a student and you see all of this information and all of these scenarios, and there's no follow-up, there's no pre-work, and then it makes it easy for a student to draw their own conclusions out of context. So the museum is a place of context and content, and our ability to do that effectively can heighten our value, I think, to the state and the national conversation.
Mm-hmm. And to be there, I would imagine, for students at a moment when they see themselves in this chain of events.
Absolutely. It's so important that when you do the right kind of preparation and you have the right follow-up, that you actually single out how and if and where do you see yourself. And if you don't see yourself, how do you create the space that you can see through the eyes of others? And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. What the museum does is give people the opportunity to have either personal moments of connections, or at a minimum, a personal understanding of experiences that they may not have any direct connection to, but they have an appreciation for in the ever growing and ever going world in which we live in. Because it's never lost on me that in the same way that we reflect on the civil rights, the modern day civil rights era of 50 years ago, that's going to happen to us 50 years from now. And so being conscious of that and how we act and how we respond to scenarios will matter, and it will be documented and reported on in some form or fashion. And what do we want to be said, and what do we want to be true?
Right. Right. I know that with the renovation that Beverly Robertson spearheaded of the museum, there were a lot of historians who were consulted on that and who were very pleased with what I'll call the upgrade and the expansion for a deeper dive into the history of this from where the museum was in 1991.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I take it that with more philanthropic engagement, you want to be able to go even deeper into that experience.
That is exactly right. And I was honored to be one of those historians who was consulted and a part of the conversation for the previous renovation. And I would like to think that that will provide some opportunity for the future. I will be able to talk about, from a historian's lens, some interpretive aspects, and having had the experience of the previous renovation and all that goes into that, that will be particularly helpful moving forward, both from maybe a hint of expertise from a historian standpoint, but certainly in my ability to talk with potential philanthropic contributors to that effort.
Mm-hmm. And it's been interesting to note that when the museum opened in 1991, there was I think one text on the wall reference to the Black Panthers and the Black Power movement in general, and now there is this wonderful area in the museum since the renovation that is all about the Black is Beautiful experience with the music, the album covers. All of that really goes into much more detail than the previous exhibit did on this. Are there other areas now that you see a need to go into as the museum's means and support allows it to?
Well, I think there's certainly opportunity to build on that type of scenario you just described. I will be working with the current staff and Dr. Noel Trent, who is the director of the education aspects of the museum and archives and interpretation, will be a key partner with me in that, as will other experts from across the country. I think that what you just mentioned with that building out, if you will, Bill, is that when you're looking at the movement and understanding the movement, the more context that we can provide, the more nuance, the more emphasis on perhaps the less told stories will be to our benefit. Most people during the modern day civil rights movement were not thinking of themselves necessarily of being, quote unquote, part of a movement. They were living their lives. They were trying to provide for their families, and they were trying to exist mostly in positive ways in society. And so when you're able to frame an era through those lenses, it makes it more approachable, I think, for most of us lay people, if you will. You always want to highlight the pioneers and the leaders and the higher profile influencers, but we would be remiss if we did not recognize that this movement encompassed an entire country, and that people who were not necessarily defining themselves as civil rights activists or contributors were in fact influencing what happened 50 years ago, and I would argue very much is the case still today.
Mm-hmm. A final point as our time grows close here. As you mentioned, you served on the museum board. What is the, I don't want to say conflict or tension, I'll say the creative tension between what donors want to see as priorities and what those in the movement, either past or present or both locally, think that the museum should be?
I would describe it as a necessary tension when you are talking about something as emotional and as personal, and in some cases as lived as the National Civil Rights Museum and what it stands for. So that presents certain challenges, perhaps, that other types of organizations aren't dealing with. But it's also where the opportunity is, because what the museum does and can do is model how do you balance, work through, compromise, not compromise, if you will, on these types of issues. In my mind, the way I think, the way I lead, and the way I do my work is that's a tension that I welcome. I can say that now, Bill, because I haven't started yet, but I think it's a necessary tension. Honestly, if everyone agreed about all aspects of the movement, then it probably wouldn't be as special of a place as it is. I would also like to note that one of the things that's often overlooked as even the recognized civil rights leaders of the time were not always in concert.
Oh, sure.
There were tensions even amongst the people who claimed they were fighting for the same things. So these tensions are natural. The goal is not to eliminate those tensions. The goal is to model how to work through tensions. And when we think about, and I am going to always bring it back to today, when we think about how do we do that today, we shouldn't expect that we're trying to build a tension-free society. What we should do, in my opinion, is have better strategies, better approaches for working through those tensions such that it's a collective win and not to the demise of any particular set of people or any particular groups.
All right. That's where we will leave the discussion for now. Dr. Russell Wigginton is the incoming president of the National Civil Rights Museum. On WKNO's Behind the Headlines this week, Rob Hughes of Porter Leith on the Head Start early childhood contract with Shelby County Schools, and what's next now that the contract has been ended by the school system. You can also hear the show on our Behind the Headlines podcast, which includes an extended discussion after the television show wrapped. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. Subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Natalie Van Gundy.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.